Maya's pen hovered above the lined page, the ink barely touching paper, when the overhead lights in the back office flickered once, twice, then surrendered to a dull, amber glow that made her skin look sickly under the fluorescent buzz. The computer screen in front of her went black with a soft electronic sigh, and in that moment of unexpected silence, she heard something she'd never noticed before in 3 years of night audits at the Fairmont Olympic Hotel. The building itself breathing, the old pipes groaning somewhere deep in the walls, the elevator cables humming their constant song 6 floors below, rain hammering the windows with the kind of fury that only Seattle in November could muster. Each drop a tiny fist demanding to be let inside. Her fingers tightened around the pen, a cheap ballpoint with the hotel logo half scraped away from nervous fidgeting during endless overnight shifts. The screen stayed black. She tapped the spacebar. Nothing. Reached for her phone, no signal. Just that spinning wheel of digital futility that meant the whole network had collapsed like a house of cards in a strong wind. Maya felt her heartbeat pick up speed, not from panic exactly, but from the sudden understanding that for the next however many hours, everything that happened in this hotel would have to be recorded the old way, by hand, by memory, by paying attention to details that normally got swallowed up by automated systems and time-stamped logs that nobody ever read unless something went catastrophically wrong. She pulled open the top drawer of the audit desk and found what she was looking for, a fresh yellow legal pad, the kind with narrow lines that her mother used to use for grocery lists and birthday card addresses, back when people still wrote things down instead of trusting their entire lives to little glowing screens. The paper felt substantial under her palm, textured and real, in a way that made her realize how long it had been since she'd actually written more than her signature on a credit card receipt. Maya clicked the pen open, then closed, then open again, a rhythmic tick-tick that helped her think, and she wrote at the top of the first page, in careful block letters, Night Audit Log, November 14th, System DO, N 11:47 p.m. The rain intensified, if that was even possible. It sounded like thousands of tiny stones being thrown against the glass, relentless and mean. Maya glanced toward the lobby, visible through the office's interior window, and saw the night bellman James, older guy with kind eyes and a slight limp from Vietnam, standing by the revolving door, watching the storm transform Fifth Avenue into a churning river of reflected neon and darkness. He caught her looking and gave her a small salute, 2 fingers to his temple, the gesture of someone who'd been through worse than a power hiccup and a cranky computer system. She returned her attention to the legal pad and began doing what the system usually did automatically, recording the night's events in real time as they unfolded, moment by moment. 11:52 p.m. to guest in room 614, called down for tea service. Chamomile, honey on the side. Delivered by room service Carlos. Shift supervisor said he was covering because the regular night server called him sick. 11:58 p.m. Heard door close heavily on 3rd floor, possibly 305, based on the echo pattern in the stairwell. Made note to check hinge mechanism during morning maintenance round. The words flowed easier than she expected, her handwriting cramped but legible. Each letter a tiny anchor holding the night in place. Maya had always been good at noticing things, at seeing patterns where other people saw random noise. It was why she'd ended up in the audit position in the first place, despite being only 29, and despite the hotel's long tradition of hiring middle-aged accountants who smelled like coffee and disappointment. She could look at a column of numbers and spot the one that didn't belong, could listen to her guest's complaint and hear the real problem hiding underneath the words they actually said. Tonight, with the computers down and the rain creating a wall of white noise that made the Fairmont Olympic feel like a ship cut loose from its moorings. That skill felt less like a parlor trick and more like something necessary, something that might actually matter. At 12:14 a.m., Maya stood and stretched, her spine crackling in 3 distinct places, like bubble wrap being slowly compressed. She walked to the office door and peered into the lobby, taking in the scene with fresh eyes. The massive crystal chandeliers casting their warm glow across marble floors that looked like frozen caramel. The burgundy velvet chairs arranged in conversational clusters that nobody ever actually used for conversation. The front desk, where her colleague, Derek, was explaining to a frustrated guest why the automated check-in kiosks weren't working. The guest business type, rumpled suit, face tight with the special kind of exhaustion that comes from delayed flights and missed connections, jabbed one finger at the dark screen as if anger could resurrect dead technology. She noticed Reed then, the night's security guard, emerging from the elevator bank with his usual purposeful stride. Reed was built like someone who'd spent serious time in a gym but had let it go soft around the edges, thick through the shoulders and chest, but with a small paunch pushing against his uniform shirt. He had dark eyes that missed nothing and a habit of rolling his neck when he was thinking hard about something, which he was doing now as he crossed the lobby and disappeared down the corridor that led to the service areas and, eventually, to the basement levels where laundry and storage and the vast mechanical systems lived in perpetual fluorescent twilight. Mia returned to her desk and wrote 12:15 a.m. Reed doing rounds, headed to lower levels. Seemed preoccupied, neck-rolling his tail. She paused, pen hovering, then added, check with him later about anything unusual. The rain drummed its endless percussion, and somewhere in the building, a phone was ringing, muffled and distant, like it was coming from underwater. If you've ever worked a night shift, really worked one, not just stayed up late, but committed to living in the world when most people are unconscious, you know that time moves differently in those hours. It stretches and contracts without warning, minutes feeling like hours and hours evaporating like steam. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever noticed the small details that everyone else misses, please subscribe to this channel and like this video. It helps us share these real, powerful stories with more people who need to hear them. Now, back to that November night, and the rain that wouldn't stop, and Maya's pen moving across yellow paper, recording a sequence of events that nobody knew yet was a sequence at all. At 12:33 a.m., the mezzanine level caught her attention during a routine visual sweep. The Fairmont Olympics mezzanine was one of those architectural features that belonged to a different era, a wide horseshoe balcony overlooking the lobby, lined with meeting rooms that hosted everything from wedding receptions to corporate strategy sessions to, once memorably, a gathering of competitive taxidermists who'd left behind a stuffed raccoon that housekeeping had found 3 days later behind a potted fern. Tonight the mezzanine was quiet, empty, and dark, except for the sconces along the walls, casting their amber pools of light every 10 feet. But there, just visible past the brass railing, was a piece of luggage that hadn't been there during her last check. It was a large rolling suitcase, black with silver hardware, the kind that business travelers bought because the salesperson promised it was indestructible. It sat at an odd angle near the top of the mezzanine stairs, not tucked away neatly, but just ... left there like someone had set it down intending to come right back, and then forgot about it, or got distracted, or decided it didn't matter anymore. Maya wrote 12:33 a.m. Unattended luggage on mezzanine level, near south stairs. Black roller bag, appears new. No owner visible. Will monitor. She considered calling Reed to check it out, But he was down in the basement doing his rounds, and the bag wasn't exactly a threat, just odd. Odd was normal in hotels, especially expensive ones. Rich people did strange things with their possessions, treated them like chess pieces, to be moved around according to rules that made sense only to them. Still, she underlined the word monitor twice, her pen pressing deep enough into the paper that she could feel the texture of the wood desk underneath through all those thin yellow sheets. The phone at the front desk rang, its old-fashioned bell cutting through the ambient noise of rain and distant traffic. Derek answered it, listened, frowned, said something Maya couldn't hear from her office, then hung up and immediately picked up the receiver again, dialing an extension. She watched him wait, his face cycling through curiosity to confusion to mild irritation, before he hung up and made a note on his own pad of paper. Maya felt a small twist of intuition in her gut, that particular sensation that wasn't quite worry, but was definitely its younger cousin. She stood and walked to the desk. "What was that?" she asked, keeping her voice low, even though the businessman from earlier had finally given up and trudged toward the elevators with his keycard clutched like a golden ticket. Derek looked up, and she saw that his usual easy smile was missing, replaced by something harder to read. "Call from 902, he said, but when I answered, nobody said anything. Just ... breathing maybe, or could have been static from the storm. I tried calling back and it just rings. Checked the system before everything crashed. 902's marked as vacant. Should be empty until Thursday." Maya felt the twist in her gut tighten. "You want me to send Reed up there when he's done with his rounds?" "Probably nothing," Derek said, but his tone suggested he thought it might be something. Could be the storm messing with the phone lines, some kind of electrical feedback. Happens sometimes in these old buildings. "Yeah," Maya agreed, not believing it any more than he did. She returned to her office and wrote, 12:41 a.m., room 902, called front desk. No voice online, possible breathing or static. Room marked vacant until Thursday. Derek tried calling back. No answer. Rain may be affecting phone system. She paused, then added, 902 is in the southeast corner, 8th floor, faces Pike Street. Check with housekeeping about last cleaning. The Fairmont Olympic Hotel had been built in 1924, back when hotels were palaces and guests expected to be treated like royalty, or at least like people whose money could buy them temporary immunity from the ordinary world. The building had survived the Depression, World War II, countless renovations and modernizations that had stripped away some of its original grandeur while trying to preserve the illusion of it. 950 rooms spread across 10 floors, a maze of corridors and service passages and hidden staircases that the staff used to move through the building like ghosts, invisible to the guests who paid premium rates to pretend they were staying somewhere that ran on magic instead of exhausted human labor. Maya had learned those hidden passages during her first month on the job, memorizing the shortcuts and the dead ends and the doors that led to mechanical rooms filled with pipes and valves and things that hummed and hissed like sleeping dragons. She'd learned which floors creaked and which stayed silent under footsteps, which rooms always smelled slightly musty no matter how many times housekeeping aired them out, which sections of the building felt warm and welcoming, and which sections felt cold in a way that had nothing to do with the thermostat settings. Room 902 was in the cold section. She'd never been inside it, but she'd walked past it dozens of times during her rounds, and there was something about that corner of the 8th floor that made her want to walk faster, to not look too closely at the shadows pooling in the alcoves, to pretend she hadn't heard whatever small sound had just echoed from somewhere she couldn't see. It was silly, superstitious, the kind of thinking her father would have dismissed with a wave of his hand and a lecture about rational behavior. But her father had never worked the night shift in a hotel that was almost a century old, and never felt the weight of all those temporary lives pressing down through the floors above, all those secrets and affairs and business deals and heartbreaks that seeped into the walls like smoke into fabric. At 12:58 a.m., Maya noticed the smell. It was faint at first, barely there, just a chemical tongue riding underneath the usual hotel scent of industrial carpet cleaner and air freshener, and the vague mustiness that accumulated in buildings where thousands of people tracked in their lives from the outside world. She sniffed, trying to place it, and realized it was chlorine. Strong chlorine, like a swimming pool's, which made no sense because the Fairmont Olympics pool was on the basement level, 3 floors below ground, and the smell was coming from somewhere much closer, somewhere on this floor. She left the office again, moving into the lobby, with her nose leading her like a bloodhound, following that sharp chemical trace. It got stronger near the elevators, then stronger still when she turned left down the corridor that ran parallel to Fifth Avenue, passing the darkened gift shop and the entrance to the Italian restaurant that served overpriced pasta to tourists who thought $45 for spaghetti carbonara was reasonable because it came on hand-painted plates. The smell peaked near a service door marked staff only, the kind of door that guests weren't supposed to notice. Painted the same cream color as the walls and flush with its frame, so it almost disappeared. Maya tested the handle logged, as it should be, but the chlorine smell was definitely coming from the other side, seeping through the tiny gap at the bottom where the door didn't quite meet the threshold. The service stairs. Someone had been in the service stairs recently, or something chemical had spilled, or the hotel's cleaning crew was storing supplies in places they weren't supposed to store them. She wrote, 1:02 a.m. Strong chlorine smell near service stairs, east side ground floor. Door locked. Smell not from pool area. Wrong direction, wrong floor. Investigate source. Possible cleaning supply spill? The rain showed no signs of stopping. If anything, it seemed to be getting worse. The wind picking up and sending sheets of water against the windows hard enough that Maya could see the glass flexing slightly, bowing inward like it was being pressed by invisible hands. The storm had been forecast, one of those atmospheric rivers that Seattle specialized in, where the sky opened up and decided to relocate a significant portion of the Pacific Ocean onto the city's head. But forecasts were one thing. Experiencing the reality of it, trapped inside a building with computers down and strange smells and phone calls from empty rooms, was something else entirely. At 1:15 a.m., as Maya was returning to her office with a cup of terrible breakroom coffee that tasted like burnt rubber mixed with regret, she saw Tess coming up from the basement level. Tess was 63 years old, had worked as a housekeeper at the Fairmont Olympic for 37 years, and possessed the kind of institutional knowledge that no employee manual could ever capture. She knew which rooms had plumbing problems that maintenance never quite fixed, which regular guests left generous tips, and which ones would complain about imaginary problems to get their rates reduced, which members of management were having affairs with each other, and which sections of the hotel were best avoided during certain phases of the moon, though she'd never explain what she meant by that last part, and Maya had never asked. Kess walked with the careful precision of someone whose knees hurt but who'd learned to compensate years ago. Her grey hair pulled back in a tight bun that made her face look severe until she smiled, which she did now, spotting Maya in the corridor. "Systems down?" she asked, her voice rough from decades of cigarettes she'd finally quit 5 years ago on doctor's orders. "Since before midnight," Maya confirmed. "Going to be a long night." Kess nodded slowly, her dark eyes moving across Maya's face in a way that felt assessing, measuring. You keeping track the old way? She gestured toward the legal pad tucked under Maya's arm. Only option. Everything's on paper until the network comes back. Something shifted in Tess's expression, a kind of recognition or approval, hard to tell which. Come with me a minute, she said, already turning back toward the basement stairs. Want to show you something. Maya hesitated, glancing back toward the lobby, where Derek was handling things competently, then followed Tess down the stairs. The basement level of the Fairmont Olympic was a different world, utilitarian and harsh, concrete and fluorescent lights, and a constant mechanical symphony of systems keeping the upper floors comfortable and presentable. They passed the laundry room, where industrial washers the size of small cars churned and rumbled behind closed doors. Past the employee break room, with its scarred table and ancient microwave. Past storage areas stacked with towers of spare linens and boxes of tiny soaps and shampoos, until Tess stopped at a door marked Archives. She pulled a key ring from her pocket, had keys to everything, another perk of being indispensable, and opened the door to reveal a small room that smelled like old paper and dust, and a particular mustiness of things that had been forgotten on purpose. Metal shelves lined the walls, packed with binders and file boxes and ledgers dating back decades. All the paper history of the hotel that nobody had gotten around to digitizing because it would have cost money and taken time, and who really needed to know how many towels were ordered in March of 1987? Tess moved to a shelf in the back corner and pulled down a cloth-covered ledger, blowing dust off the top before handing it to Maya. From before computers, Tess said quietly, when the night auditors used to track everything by hand, every guest, every charge, every incident. Open it. Maya set down her coffee and legal pad and carefully lifted the cloth cover. Inside, the ledger's pages were yellowed, but still intact, covered in neat handwriting that varied as the years progressed, and different auditors took their turns with the pen. She flipped through slowly, seeing entries from 1967, 1972, 1983, the mundane record of a hotel's nighttime existence. Guests checking in and out, maintenance issues, noise complaints, a fire alarm on New Year's Eve 1979 that turned out to be someone smoking in the elevator. Why are you showing me this? Mia asked, though part of her already knew. Because, Tess said, when the technology fails, and it always fails eventually, the only thing that matters is whether somebody was paying attention and writing it down. The only thing that survives is what you notice and record. She tapped the ledger with one finger, her nail making a small clicking sound against the old paper. You're good at seeing things, Maya. Better than most of the people they hire now. People who stare at screens all night and don't actually look at the hotel, don't see what's really happening. Tonight, with everything down, that skill matters more than it usually does. Maya felt a strange weight settle across her shoulders. Not unpleasant exactly, but significant. Tess pulled a smaller notebook from the shelf, this one bound in brown leather that had cracked with age, and pressed it into Maya's hands. Use this too, she said. Good paper holds memory better than yellow pads from Office Depot. When the light fails, memory needs proper lines to follow. They stood in the dusty silence of the archive room, rain drumming on pipes overhead, and Maya understood that something was being passed to her, some responsibility or trust that transcended the simple job of counting room charges and balancing the night's receipts. She nodded, accepting the leather notebook, feeling its weight and texture, the slight give of aged binding, the way it seemed to fit her palm, like it had been waiting for her specifically. Back upstairs at 1:34 a.m., Maya transferred her notes from the legal pad to the leather notebook, her handwriting adapting to the older paper. becoming slightly more careful, more deliberate. She wrote about the luggage on the mezzanine, the call from room 902, the chlorine smell, Reed's preoccupation, the storm that had turned Seattle into a grey blur beyond the windows. And then she added something new, an observation she hadn't consciously registered until her pen was moving across the page. 1:34 a.m. Pattern emerging. Checking previous notes. Room 614 chamomile tea equals female guest traveling alone per check-in records. Room 305 heavy door closing equals female guest traveling alone per check-in. Room 902 empty, but phone call equals female guest scheduled for Thursday check-in per Derek. Connecting. Her heart kicked harder against her ribs. She flipped back through the mental catalogue of the night, replaying the small sounds and incidents, and pulled up the hotel's floor plan from memory, visualizing the layout. The rooms she'd noted weren't random. They formed a rough pattern, a progression through the building that avoided the main elevator banks where cameras were mounted, that stuck to sections of corridors where sightlines were limited, that suggested someone who knew the hotel's geography intimately, someone who knew exactly which rooms held solo female travelers and which didn't, someone who was moving through the building with purpose. Maya stood up so fast her chair rolled backward and hit the wall. She grabbed her phone, still no signal, and the notebook, and walked quickly to the front desk. Derek looked up from his own paperwork, caught her expression, and straightened. What? Where's Reed? Still on his rounds? Should be finishing up the basement sweep and heading to the upper floors. Why? What's going on? Maya opened the notebook and showed him her notes, her finger tracing the patterns she'd identified. These rooms, female guests alone, and someone's been moving through the building in a way that connects them, staying off the main routes where the cameras are. She saw Derek's face shift from polite interest to focused concern. The call from 902, that room isn't empty. Someone's in there, or was in there, or is using it as some kind of waypoint. And we wouldn't know any of this if the system was working, because everything would just be data points that never got examined all at once, never got seen as part of a bigger picture. Derek reached for the house phone, started to dial Reed's radio, then remembered that the network crash had taken out the digital radio system too. Damn it, he said quietly, viciously. Okay, you stay here. Keep watching the lobby and the mezzanine. I'll go find Reed and we'll check those rooms. Starting with 902. Lock the office door behind you and don't open it unless you know who's knocking. Derek, just do it, Mia. Trust me. He was already moving, his usual easygoing demeanor replaced by something harder, more cope-like, and Mia remembered suddenly that Derek had been in law enforcement before the hotel, had left after some incident he never talked about, had chosen hospitality over handcuffs for reasons he kept private. She returned to the office and locked the door as instructed, then positioned herself where she could see both the lobby and the mezzanine through the interior windows. The black roller bag was still there, sitting at its odd angle like a faithful dog waiting for its owner. The rain continued its assault, and the lights flickered again, a warning that the backup generators were being tested by the storm's fury. Maya wrote in the notebook, 1:42 a.m., pattern identified to Derek. He and Reed checking upper floors starting with 902. System still down. Storm intensifying. Luggage on mezzanine still unattended. Feeling wrong. Something is very wrong. Minutes passed like hours. The lobby remained quiet except for one elderly couple who emerged from the elevator in bathrobes. Crossed to the front desk, asked Derek's replacement, when had Derek left? Maya had been writing and missed it about ice machines, and shuffled back the way they'd come, oblivious to the tension crackling through the building like static electricity before lightning. Maya's pen moved, almost without conscious thought now, recording everything. The couple in matching blue robes. 1:47 a.m. The night bellman James, checking the front door locks. 1:51 a.m. A housekeeping cart, rolling past, pushed by someone Maya didn't recognize. Moving too fast, disappearing down the corridor toward the service stairs. 1:53 a.m. Wait, she didn't recognize the person pushing the cart. The Fairmont Olympic didn't have housekeeping doing rounds at this hour, unless there was an emergency cleanup, and the cart had moved too fast, pushed with purpose rather than the tired resignation of someone working overnight. Maya grabbed the notebook and left the office, ignoring her own promise to stay put, moving quickly across the lobby and down the corridor. The housekeeping cart was abandoned near the service stairs, the same door where she'd smelled chlorine 2 hours earlier. She tested the door, again still locked from this side, which meant whoever had been pushing the cart had a key, had gone into the service stairs, had access they shouldn't have, or access they'd stolen or borrowed from someone who wouldn't notice until much later. She pressed her ear against the door and heard nothing but rain and pipes and the building's constant background noise. But when she knelt down and looked at the gap under the door, she saw something that made her breath catch. Fresh water, still beading on the floor, trailing from under the door in a thin line that caught the corridor light and gleamed like a silver thread. Someone had just come through here. Someone whose shoes or pants or uniform was wet from being outside in the storm. Someone who was now in the service stairwell, moving between floors in a way that bypassed every camera and every guest and every normal route through the hotel. Maya ran. She ran back to the office, fumbled the key in the lock, shoved inside and grabbed her phone to call 911. No signal. Still no signal. The storm or the network crash, or both conspiring to isolate the hotel like it was a ship in the middle of an ocean. She grabbed the house phone on the desk, heard blessed dial tone, punched 911, and told the dispatcher in a voice that shook only slightly that she needed police at the Fairmont Olympic Hotel, that there was someone in the building who shouldn't be there, someone moving through service areas and targeting female guests. And yes, she would stay on the line, and yes, she understood officers were being dispatched, but the storm had slowed response times across the city, and yes, she would try to remain calm. She hung up only when the dispatcher confirmed that help was coming, that Reed and Derek needed to be warned, that she should make herself somewhere safe and wait. But Maya had never been good at waiting when action was possible, and every instinct screaming through her nervous system said that waiting meant someone would get hurt, meant the person in the service stairs would finish whatever they'd planned and disappear into the storm before police arrived, meant all her careful noting and pattern recognition would be useless because she hadn't acted fast enough. The leather notebook sat on the desk, open to her last entry. Maya picked up the pen and wrote 2:01 a.m. Unknown person in service stairs. Wet from outside, moving between floors, unseen. Called 911. Police, Rod, but delayed by storm. Derek and Reed, checking 902, unaware of stairs threat. Decision, cannot wait, must warn them, must stop this. Then she wrote something else, something her father would have called foolish, but that felt necessary in a bone-deep way. If something happens to me, these notes explain everything. Investigate the judge. Check the luggage. Follow the pattern. She left the office for the last time that night, moving with purpose now, instead of fear. The notebook clutched in one hand and her phone in the other, even though it was useless. The front desk was empty. Where had the replacement gone? To break, to bathroom, to help Derek and Reed. She didn't stop to figure it out. She went to the mezzanine stairs and climbed them quickly, her sensible work shoes silent on the carpeted steps. And when she reached the top, she went directly to the black roller bag that had been sitting unattended for over an hour. The bag wasn't locked. The zippers slid open easily, and Maya lifted the lid with hands that had steadied themselves through sheer force of will. Inside, 4 keycard blanks, the kind that could be programmed to open any room if you had access to the encoding machine at the front desk. 2 uniforms, housekeeping and maintenance, neatly folded. A tablet computer, currently dead, no charge. A printed schedule of night shift rotations for the entire month of November. A list of room numbers, with check marks next to some and circles next to others. And Maya recognized every single circled room: 614, 305, 902, and 15 others scattered across different floors. Every one of them registered to solo female travelers. At the bottom of the bag, wrapped in a plastic grocery sack, were items that made her stomach turn: a roll of duct tape, zip ties, a folding knife with a wooden handle, a small glass bottle filled with clear liquid that she didn't want to identify but suspected was chloroform or something similar. She closed the bag with hands that now shook visibly and pulled her phone out one more time. Still no signal. But the phone had a camera, and she could document, could create a record, even if she couldn't transmit it yet. She photographed the bag's contents from multiple angles, her flash making harsh shadows in the mezzanine's dim light, and then she opened the notebook and wrote with quick, precise strokes: 2:09 a.m., contents of mezzanine bag, keycards blank, programmable, stolen uniforms, housekeeping, maintenance, schedule of shifts, list of targets, all solo female travelers, restraints, weapon, suspected chemical agent. This is not opportunistic. This is planned, organized. Someone with insider knowledge. The lights went out. Complete darkness, so sudden and total that Maya gasped despite herself, her heart slamming into overdrive as every ambient sound became amplified. Rain hammering harder than ever. Something creaking in the ceiling. Footsteps, yes, definitely footsteps, somewhere below her on the lobby floor, moving fast. She fumbled with her phone, activated the flashlight function, and the narrow beam cut through the darkness like a knife through water, illuminating a small circle of carpet and brass railing, and her own hand still clutching the notebook. 3 minutes. The darkness lasted 3 minutes, while Maya pressed herself against the mezzanine wall, making herself as small as possible, listening to those footsteps circle the lobby below, pause near the front desk, move toward the service corridor, stop. In those 3 minutes, she understood how fragile the illusion of safety was, how quickly the ordinary world could tilt sideways and reveal the predatory underneath, how all the lights and cameras and systems were just pretty decorations over the fundamental truth that people hurt each other when they thought they could get away with it. When the lights returned, they came back in stages, emergency lighting first, then the chandeliers flickering uncertainly, then finally the full blaze of restored power. Maya blinked against the sudden brightness and immediately looked down at the lobby. Empty. No footsteps. No figure lurking. Just James the bellman, emerging from the back offices, looking confused and relieved that the power had returned. She looked at the bag. Still there. Still open. But wait. Something was different. She scanned the mezzanine again and realized what had changed. The housekeeping cart that she'd seen abandoned near the service stairs earlier was now gone. Whoever had been in the building during the blackout had retrieved it, had used those 3 minutes of darkness to move again. Maya descended the mezzanine stairs in a controlled rush, hitting the lobby floor and crossing to James in 5 long strides. "Did you see anyone just now during the blackout? Anyone moving through the lobby or the corridors?" James shook his head, his kind eyes clouded with concern at her tone. "No, miss. I was in the back office, checking the breaker panel. Came out when the power returned. Why? What's happened? Before Maya could answer, Derek emerged from the elevator bank, and Reed was with him, and both men looked grim. Derek saw Maya and crossed to her quickly. 902 was empty, he said quietly, but the phone was off the hook, lying on the floor, and the bed had been disturbed. Someone sat on it recently, left an impression. We're checking the other rooms on your list now, knocking on doors, making sure everyone's safe. It's not over, Maya said, and she told them quickly about the bag, the service stairs, the person moving through the building. Garrick's jaw clenched tight enough that she could see the muscle jumping, and Reed was already pulling his radio, which apparently worked again now that power was restored, and calling for additional security to seal the service. Stairwells, and check every exit. The bag's on the mezzanine, Maya said. Everything's still there. I documented it with my phone. But whoever this is, they were here during the blackout. They moved through the lobby. They took the housekeeping cart from the service corridor. They're still in the building. Reed nodded, his preoccupation from earlier replaced by sharp focus. Show me the bag. Derek, get on the main house phone and call 911 again. Tell them we have an active situation and need immediate response. James, you lock the front doors right now. Nobody in or out until police arrive. If anyone asks, tell them it's a security precaution due to the storm. He looked at Maya, and there was something like respect in his expression. You did good work tonight. Your notes might have just saved lives. They moved together to the mezzanine, and Reed photographed the bag's contents himself, while Maya stood guard with her notebook open, ready to write down anything else that seemed important. The pen felt alive in her hand now, charged with purpose, and she understood what Tess had meant about good paper holding memory. The leather notebook had absorbed the night's events, had given them weight and permanence, had transformed scattered observations into a coherent narrative that could be acted upon. Without her notes, the luggage would have been just luggage, the phone call just a glitch, the chlorine smell just a mystery. Together, they formed a map of intent, a diagram of danger that had been invisible until someone had bothered to pay attention and write it down. At 2:31 a.m., the police arrived, 2 patrol units, fighting through flooded streets, their lights washing blue and red across the Fairmont Olympics facade, their officers tired but alert. Maya handed over her notebook, watching as a female officer named Chun read through the entries with increasing focus, her eyes moving faster as the pattern emerged from the handwritten pages. This is incredibly detailed, Officer Chun said, and it wasn't a question, but an assessment. You timed everything, connected the rooms, identified the pattern before anything actually happened. How did you know to look for this? I didn't, Maya admitted. I was just doing my job the old-fashioned way because the computers were down. I was paying attention because I had no choice. She paused, then added more quietly, and because someone taught me that when the systems fail, the only thing that matters is whether you were watching and writing it down. Officer Chun nodded slowly and turned to her partner, a heavy-set man named Rodriguez, who was examining the contents of the black bag with gloved hands. We need to process this, and we need to lock down the building until we're sure whoever brought this bag is apprehended. The night's not over. But Maya was thinking about something else now, something that had been nagging at the edge of her awareness. The cart, she said suddenly, the housekeeping cart that was taken during the blackout. Those carts are numbered, right? They are assigned to specific floors or specific staff members. If we can figure out which cart was taken, we might be able to figure out who took it, or at least where they were planning to go. Derek, who'd been coordinating with hotel management on his phone, looked up sharply. The cards are tracked by housekeeping. Each one has a metal plate with a number welded to the frame. If we can find which cart is missing from the storage area, we can check the housekeeping logs to see who signed it out, or if it was taken without authorization. Reed was already moving, gesturing for Officer Rodriguez to follow him. Basement level, housekeeping storage. Let's go. They disappeared into the elevator, and Maya found herself standing in the lobby with Officer Chun and Derek, the three of them forming an odd triangle of tension and adrenaline, and a particular exhaustion that comes from fear sustained over hours. "Walk me through your night one more time," Officer Chun said gently, and Maya did, referencing the notebook, explaining each entry and what had prompted it, describing the way small details had accumulated into larger understanding. The officer recorded everything on her own tablet technology, restored and working again, though Maya felt a strange nostalgic attachment to the pad and paper method that had served her so well. At 2:47 a.m., Reed returned with Rodriguez, and both men wore expressions that Maya couldn't quite read. "Card 7 is missing from the basement storage," Reed said. "According to the log, it should be locked up overnight. But here's where it gets interesting. Card 7 is one of 2 cards that have master access to the service elevators on every floor. Whoever took it can move through the building completely unseen by any guest, can access any floor, can appear and disappear like a ghost, and the service elevator has its own camera system," Officer Chun asked. Yes, Reed confirmed. "But if the person who took the cart also has access to security systems," he trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air like smoke. Maya felt something click in her mind, a final piece sliding into place. "What about hotel management?" she asked quietly. "Who has access to both the housekeeping storage keys and the security system controls? Who would know the night shift schedules well enough to plan this kind of operation?" Derek and Reed exchanged a look, and Derek said carefully, "Upper management, obviously. Security supervisors, executive housekeeping, IT department, because they maintain the security servers, and ... double quotes," he hesitated, "and anyone on the board of directors, because they have override access for emergency situations." "Board of directors," Maya repeated. "How many people on the board?" 7, Reed said. "But only 2 of them are ever physically in the building with any regularity. The rest are investment partners who show up maybe twice a year for meetings." Officer Chun had her tablet out again, pulling up information. "Give me names." All 7. Reed provided them from memory. 5 names Maya had never heard before, plus Richard Warren, the hotel's general manager, who'd been with the Fairmont Olympic for 20 years, and Judge Marcus Holloway, who'd joined the board 3 years ago and apparently maintained a standing reservation for a suite whenever he was in Seattle on court business. Maya felt her skin prickle. "Judge Holloway," she said. "What room does he usually book?" "The executive suite," Derek said slowly. 11th floor, 1105. Officer Chun was already typing, her face illuminated by the tablet's glow, her fingers moving with the precise speed of someone who'd run background checks and warrant searches 1,000 times. The lobby had become something else now, something other than a hotel. It was a command center, a war room, a place where the night's accumulated evidence was being transformed into official investigation, into the machinery of justice, grinding to life. Maya sat on one of the burgundy velvet chairs that nobody ever used for conversation, and added one final entry to the leather notebook. 2:52 a.m. Judge Marcus Holloway, identified as potential suspect, board member with override access. Executive Suite 1105. Pattern suggests predatory behavior targeting vulnerable women. Police searching records and warrant database now. The minutes that followed moved with the strange elasticity that intense situations create, sometimes fast, sometimes glacial. Time losing its normal rhythm and becoming instead a function of heartbeat and breath and the intensity of focus. Officer Chone spoke quietly into her radio, requesting backup units to stage outside the hotel without lights, requesting the Seattle Police Department's Major Crimes Unit to respond immediately, requesting a warrant for Suite 1105 based on the evidence in the notebook and the contents of the mezzanine bag. She was refused at first. A judge on the state court system didn't get arrested based on circumstantial evidence and observations from a hotel auditor, even if those observations were compelling. But Officer Chone kept talking, kept presenting the evidence, kept painting the picture, until something shifted in the voice on the other end of the radio, and the answer changed to yes. Warrant approved. Units moving into position. Reed had his hand on his radio, communicating with James at the front desk, with the night manager who'd emerged from somewhere in the back offices, looking terrified and pale, with hotel security scattered throughout the building, locked down the service stairs on the 8th, 9th, and 11th floors. He was saying, "Nobody moves without my authorization. And get a count every guest currently in the building, every room occupied. Confirm they're all safe. Start with the rooms on Maya's list. These women need to know what's happening, and they need to know they're protected now." Derek had moved to the front desk and was running a computer search now that power and network were restored, his face growing grimmer with each keystroke. "Judge Holloway checked in 3 days ago," he said, looking up from the screen. "Registered under his real name, paid in full, Suite 1105. But here's what's interesting. He also rented 2 additional rooms this month, rooms 614 and 305, both charged to corporate accounts, registered to shell companies, both under different names. The rooms where the female guests are staying," Maya whispered, understanding flooding through her like cold water. He wasn't just predatory, he was systematic. He wasn't just targeting women randomly. He knew which rooms they'd be in. He had access to reservation information. Officer Chone was already on her tablet again, pulling up reservation records with credentials that allowed her emergency access. 17 rooms across 3 hotels in the Seattle area, she said, her voice tight with anger and urgency. All registered in the same pattern. Corporate accounts, different names. But they correspond to rooms where solo female travelers were staying. This isn't a one-night impulse. This is a pattern that spans months, probably years. Maya felt sick. She thought about the women, upstairs, sleeping or awake, unaware of how close they'd come to something terrible, how the threads of their safety had held only by the thinnest margins, by an administrative decision to let computers fail at exactly the right moment, by her decision to pick up a pen and start writing down the night's small details. She thought about the women and the other hotels, the ones who might not be so lucky, the ones who might have already experienced whatever horrors Judge Holloway had planned for them. And she wrote in the notebook, 2:57 a.m., "This is bigger than one night. This is bigger than one hotel. Evidence suggests multi-location targeting pattern. Recommendation: immediate investigation of other Seattle area hotels where Holloway had registered access. Victims may exist. Evidence may exist." At 3:04 a.m., Reed received a radio call that brought everything into sharp focus. Suspects sighted on the 11th floor service corridor, moving toward executive suite. All units standing by for authorization to approach and detain. Officer Chan's hand went up in a sharp gesture that meant wait, and she spoke into her own radio. "Confirm visual identification. Is the suspect armed? Are any guests in immediate danger?" The response crackled through with static. "Suspect is not visibly armed. No guests reported in danger at this time. Suspect appears to be attempting to access Suite 1105 using a master keycard. Do not let him enter the suite," Officer Chun commanded, her voice carrying the kind of absolute authority that came from years of making life and death decisions and living with the consequences. Maintain visual contact from safe distance and await warrant confirmation. All units hold position. Maya understood what was happening. They were building the case, documentation by documentation, making it airtight so that anything that happened next, arrest, detention, interrogation, would stand up to legal scrutiny, would survive the kind of defense that expensive lawyers provided to judges who'd spent their careers manipulating the legal system. Officer Chone pulled up her phone and made a call to someone in the district attorney's office. Someone apparently still awake despite the ungodly hour. Someone who could authorize the final legal steps that would transform suspicion into official action. The conversation lasted 90 seconds. When Officer Chun hung up, she looked at Maya and said, "The warrant is verbal for now. Full written warrant incoming within the hour. We can move on, Suite 1105. We can detain the suspect pending processing. And I want to thank you," she continued, her dark eyes steady and sincere, "for doing your job well enough that a predator is going to spend the next several decades in a prison cell instead of continuing to hunt. That's not hyperbole. What you documented tonight will likely result in the apprehension of someone who was actively engaged in what we call serial predation preparation." Maya felt the weight of that statement settle into her bones, heavy and real. She'd been thinking of this as a night audit problem, a puzzle to solve, a pattern to recognize. But Officer Chun was naming it for what it was: prevention of violence, interruption of a process that had been underway for a very long time, the difference between victims and survivors. She thought about Tesh showing her the old ledgers, about the institutional memory embedded in those yellowed pages, about the way keeping careful records had literally saved lives. "Is someone going to go talk to the women?" Maya asked. "The guests, the ones whose names were on the list. They need to know. We're sending female officers to each room right now," Officer Chun confirmed. "Not to frighten them, but to brief them, to keep them safe, to let them know that a criminal investigation is underway and that they're witnesses to something significant. Some of them will be shocked. Some will already know they were in danger and will be relieved. And some ... double quotes." She paused. "Some will realize that their intuition was right, that they felt something was wrong, and that something was, and they'll spend the next several years working through what that means." Reed had been listening on his radio, and now he turned to Officer Chern and said quietly, "Suspect is attempting to access the suite. We're moving in now." They went to the security office on the second floor, accessed via a staff-only corridor that Maya had never been in before. The room was filled with monitors showing different angles of the hotel, and on the central screen, they could see the 11th floor service corridor and Suite 1105's entrance. Two officers in Seattle PD uniforms had moved into position, and between them stood a man in a rumpled suit, his hair disheveled, his hands still raised toward the door's card slot. Judge Marcus Holloway looked like exactly what he was: a man of significant wealth and power who'd spent most of his adult life having people defer to him, accommodate him, arrange things so that his desires met minimal resistance. He was in his late 50s, silver-haired, with the kind of face that probably looked distinguished in a courtroom and predatory in person. He turned as the officers approached, and for a moment the screen caught his expression: confusion, then recognition that something had gone wrong, then a kind of cold fury that made Maya's skin crawl. The officers didn't wait for him to speak. They were moving, professional and practiced, one approaching from each side, hands going to the bindings they carried, Miranda rights being recited in voices that were kind but absolutely firm. Judge Holloway tried to argue. Of course he did. his voice sharp with the expectation that words and credentials and threats would solve whatever this problem was. But the officers were not swayed by arguments or the magic that judicial status usually conveyed, and within 60 seconds, Judge Marcus Holloway was in handcuffs being led toward the service elevator that would take him down to the lobby and from there to the Seattle Police Department's downtown precinct and eventually to a holding cell. As his figure disappeared from the monitor, Officer Chun turned to Meyer and said, "The bag on the mezzanine? There's a key card in there that we found during the initial search. Attached to the key is a number 1105. It's his personal key to the executive suite. He had everything he needed to move through this hotel undetected, to know which rooms held which guests, to access areas that normal visitors couldn't reach." "What's going to happen to him?" Meyer asked, though part of her didn't want to know, didn't want to think about the mechanisms of justice and how sometimes they worked and sometimes they failed. "Criminal charges," Officer Chun said flatly. "Attempted kidnapping, assault with a dangerous weapon, unlawful imprisonment, sexual assault, potentially more depending on what the investigation turns up at his home and his office. He'll be processed, arraigned, held without bail because he's a flight risk and because judges don't generally get to go home on bail when they're arrested for predatory crimes. Then it becomes a matter of discovery, of trial, of justice doing what it's supposed to do. But none of that happens if you don't do what you did tonight. The hours after that move differently, less like a crime scene and more like the aftermath of contained disaster. Police forensics teams arrived to process the black bag and photograph the mezzanine. FBI agents showed up because attempted kidnapping of women across state lines, if that's what it was, made it a federal matter, and they took possession of the tablet and the lists and all the physical evidence. The Major Crimes Unit conducted interviews with the female guests on Meyer's list, protecting their privacy and their dignity, while also gathering statements that would form the foundation of the prosecution's case. And throughout it all, Meyer sat in the security office with her leather notebook, and police officers kept returning to ask her questions, to have her clarify her observations, to walk them through her reasoning. They were looking for gaps in the narrative, for inconsistencies that might suggest something other than what appeared to have happened, because that's what lawyers did. They looked for places where the chain of evidence could be broken, where reasonable doubt could grow like fungi in dark places. But the leather notebook held page after page of careful observation and connected thinking, each entry time-stamped and detailed enough that it created an unbroken trail from her initial awareness that something was wrong through to her identification of Judge Holloway as the threat. It was, as Officer Chun said multiple times, the most comprehensively documented case she'd seen in 15 years on the police force. At 5:33 a.m., as the sky was beginning its slow transformation from black to deep purple to the grey-blue that preceded dawn, as the rain had finally begun to ease and the storm was moving east toward the Cascade Mountains, as the Fairmont Olympic Hotel settled back into something approaching normal, with police and forensics and federal agents moving through its corridors like authorized ghosts, Derek found Meyer in the security office and said gently, "You should go home. You've been up for 24 hours straight, basically, and you need sleep." "I can't," Mia said, and even to her own ears her voice sounded cracked and far away. "There's still so much that needs to be documented, so many statements, so many, Maya." Derek sat down beside her in one of the ergonomic chairs that the security team used. "You did your job. You did it extraordinarily well. But now you need to let other people do their jobs. The police are trained for this. The FBI is trained for this. What you need to do is take yourself home and rest and try to process what you witnessed tonight." She looked at him and understood that he was right, but that knowing something intellectually and being able to act on it were two very different things. Her body was running on adrenaline and shock, and the particular high that came from having prevented something terrible. And crashing from that high seemed impossible and also necessary and also terrifying. "What about the guests?" she asked. "The women, are they okay?" "The ones we've been able to talk to are traumatized but safe," Derek said. "Officers are staying in the corridor outside their rooms. Additional security has been arranged. The hotel is providing counseling services, and if they want to press charges or participate in the investigation, our legal team will support them. But yes, they're alive and unharmed and aware of what could have happened and how close they came to something very different." Mia nodded slowly, understanding that this was as good as it was going to get, that a gratitude for narrowly avoided disaster was not the same as justice, but was better than the alternative. She stood up carefully, as if her body might protest or break apart, and Derek escorted her to the employee locker room where she collected her belongings, her jacket, her purse, the leather notebook that had somehow become the most important document in Seattle right now. The lobby was different in the early morning light, transformed by the presence of official vehicles and emergency lights, and the serious business of law enforcement doing its work. James the bellman was still there, looking like he'd aged a decade during the night shift, and he caught Maya's eye as she passed and gave her a thumbs up, a small gesture of recognition that meant everything. Outside, the rain had stopped. The streets were washed clean, gleaming like polished marble, and the air smelled like concrete and wet stone, and the particular freshness that follows storms. Maya walked to her car in a kind of fugue state, each step deliberate and slow, her mind trying to process the last several hours as they'd actually happened, and not just as a dream or a movie she'd watched. She sat in the driver's seat for a long time before starting the engine, the leather notebook sitting on the passenger seat beside her like a living thing. She opened it one more time and read through her own words, her own observations, the careful record of a night that had changed everything, and she understood, fully and completely, why Tess had given her that notebook, why Tess had shown her the archives, why the old ledgers were kept with such care, despite decades passing since anyone had actually written in them. Because when the systems failed, and they always failed eventually, the only thing that mattered was whether someone had been paying attention, whether someone had bothered to write it down, whether the fragile technology of pen and paper could preserve what the digital world was too fast and too algorithmic to catch. She drove home through empty streets, pulled into her apartment building's garage, climbed the stairs to her third-floor unit with the kind of exhaustion that made every step feel like she was moving through water. Her bed was unmade from yesterday morning, her coffee cup still sitting on the nightstand, the ordinary detritus of a life interrupted by extraordinary events. She set the leather notebook carefully on her pillow, stripped off her clothes, and stood under a hot shower until the water began to run cold, and she could no longer deny that her body was shutting down, that sleep was coming whether she wanted it or not. In her dreams, Maya walked through corridors that stretched impossibly long, through service stairways that doubled back on themselves, through rooms that held secret horrors and small mercies in equal measure. She dreamed of rain that never stopped, of pens that rode with blood, of notebooks that grew new pages as she watched. She dreamed of Tessie's weathered face and Officer Chun's determined expression, and Judge Holloway's moment of recognition when he understood that his luck had finally, irrevocably run out. She woke up at 3:14 p.m., according to the clock on her nightstand, having slept the deep and dreamless sleep that follows genuine trauma and genuine heroism. For a moment she felt disoriented, convinced that none of it had actually happened, that she'd imagined the whole night as some elaborate fever dream. But then she looked to her left, and the leather notebook was still there, still real, its worn leather cover holding the night's testimony, the way a reliquary holds sacred objects. She picked up the notebook and called Officer Chun, the number now stored in her phone after the long night of interviews. The officer answered on the second ring, sounding alert and functional in a way that suggested she either hadn't slept or had the kind of training that let her survive on minimal rest. "It's Maya," she said quietly. "I just wanted to check in, to see if there was anything else I could do. Any other information that would be helpful, actually." "Yes," Officer Chone said, and there was a note of something like warmth in her voice. "Judge Holloway's attorney tried to get him released pending trial this morning. The judge, different judge obviously, because we recused the entire 8th District from this cast-denied bail. Holloway is being held in King County Jail pending arraignment, and when I walked past his interrogation room earlier, he looked like a man who'd finally understood that his career, his freedom, and his life as he knew it were over." "Did he confess?" Maya asked. "Partially," Officer Chone said. "He's lawyered up now, so we're not getting full cooperation. But he admitted to being in the Fairmont Olympic last night, admitted to being in possession of the materials we found. But he's claiming the bag belonged to someone else, that he was just holding it for a friend, that he had no knowledge of its contents. Standard defense strategy. But here's what's important. We found similar materials in his home office, more blank keycards, more lists of targets, more evidence that this was premeditated and systematic. We're expanding the investigation to include hotels in Portland, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. We have reason to believe this pattern extends back at least 5 years, and possibly longer." Maya felt the enormity of that settle onto her shoulders. 5 years. Potentially dozens of women. Potentially a scope of predation that was staggering in its organization and deliberation. "Did I help stop it?" she asked, needing to know, needing that confirmation. "You absolutely did," Officer Chun said firmly. "You didn't stop the entire pattern that's going to take months or years of investigation across multiple jurisdictions, but you stopped him in the act. You prevented at least 17 women from becoming victims, and you provided evidence so comprehensive that his attorney is going to have a very hard time convincing a jury that his client was anything other than exactly what he appears to be, a predator using his position and access to target vulnerable women." After she hung up, Maya made tea, sat on her couch with the leather notebook on her lap, and tried to process what Officer Chun had told her. 5 years. The magnitude of that number kept trying to grow beyond the boundaries of her understanding, but she kept pulling it back into focus, kept reminding herself that each year represented something prevented, something interrupted, something saved by virtue of a power outage and a pen and the decision to pay attention. Her phone rang. Jerick, checking in to see if she was okay, to let her know that the Fairmont Olympic was operating normally despite the police presence in the background, to tell her that the female guests were being offered free stays at other luxury hotels as compensation for the trauma, to say that her job was secure and her bravery recognized. Then Tess called, and when Maya heard the older woman's voice, she started crying without meaning to, tears that came from somewhere deep and primal and necessary. "I had to use the notebook," Maya said through tears. "Everything Holloway had done, everything he was planning, it was all in my notes. If I hadn't been writing it down because the system failed, if I hadn't made those connections, those women—" "I know," Tess said gently, "and that's why I gave you that notebook. Not because I knew this specific thing was going to happen, but because I've worked in hotels for almost 4 decades, and I know that the things that matter most are the things that are easy to miss. I know that systems fail. I know that careful observation is worth more than all the technology in the world. And I knew that you had the kind of mind that could see the patterns, and the kind of character that would act on them instead of just writing them down and going home. What happens now? Maya asked. Now, Tess said, you rest, your process. You understand that what you did was remarkable, but that you're not responsible for Judge Holloway's choices or his crimes. You're only responsible for the part of the story that you controlled, which was paying attention and reporting what you saw. The rest is up to other systems, other people, the machinery of justice that's finally being pointed at someone who's been preying on vulnerable people for years. You did your part. Now let others do theirs. The leather notebook sat on Maya's lap as she listened to Tess's gentle wisdom, feeling the weight of it and also its lightness, understanding that the pages were not a burden but a gift, not a responsibility but a record of what was possible when someone bothered to really see the night unfold. Days passed. The Fairmont Olympic returned to its ordinary function, though with a layer of sadness and awareness that hadn't been there before. The national news picked up the story. Prominent Seattle judge arrested on multiple serious charges. Investigation extends across 4 states. Evidence compiled by a hotel night auditor was critical to apprehension. Networks called wanting interviews. Magazines wanted to profile the whistleblower who stopped a serial predator. Books were being proposed. Documentaries, podcast episodes, all the mechanisms through which trauma gets transformed into entertainment and cautionary tale. Maya turned most of it down. She gave a statement to the police, attended a preliminary hearing where she testified about her observations and her notes, and provided the leather notebook as evidence, a certified copy, while she kept the original. She met with victims' advocates and heard stories from the women who'd been in those circled rooms. Stories of near misses and interrupted violence and the particular trauma that came from knowing that something terrible had almost happened to you and that you'd been oblivious to the danger until the moment it was revealed. 2 weeks after that night, Maya received a formal commendation from the Seattle Police Department and the FBI. She was invited to speak at law enforcement and conferences about the importance of human observation in an age of automated surveillance. She was offered better positions at other hotels, corporate security jobs, positions that would have paid more money and come with more prestige. But she stayed at the Fairmont Olympic, continued working the night shift, and had begun to notice other things, small patterns, minor inconsistencies, the tiny details that didn't quite fit. Not predators so far, but maintenance issues that could become emergencies. Potential fraud in the reservation system, a guest with credit cards that didn't match his ID. She continued recording them in leather-bound notebooks. Because Tess had been right. When the light failed, memory needed proper lines to follow. One evening, as Maya was starting her shift, Tess found her in the back office and pressed another leather notebook into her hands. This one identical to the first, but with pristine blank pages waiting to be filled. You understand now, Tess said. You understand that what seems small, paying attention, writing things down, connecting patterns, is actually the most important work there is. Because every crime prevented is dozens of victims saved. Every careful observation is a line of defense. Every page you fill is a layer of protection over people who are too tired or distracted or trusting to protect themselves. Maya took the notebook and felt the weight of responsibility and purpose and the particular gift that comes from seeing what others miss. She thought about Judge Holloway in King County Jail, awaiting trial on charges that would almost certainly result in decades of imprisonment. She thought about the 17 women who'd been in his circled rooms, who would never know how close they'd come to violence, who would never read her notes or understand the exact sequence of observations that had preserved their safety. She thought about all the other predators still operating in hotels across the country, still using the anonymity of travel to hunt, still exploiting systems and trust and the ordinary invisibility of solo women moving through the world. And she understood that her work at the Fairmont Olympic was not the end of a story, but the beginning of something larger, something that would take a whole life to accomplish. The work of seeing, recording, connecting, acting, the work of transformation through attention. On her last entry in the original leather notebook, before storing it away as evidence and history, Maya wrote, "The night changed nothing and changed everything. Judge Holloway is still a predator. The systems that allowed him to operate for 5 years are still flawed. The vulnerability of women alone in hotels is still real. But because someone paid attention, because someone wrote things down, because someone refused to accept coincidence when pattern was possible, 17 women went to sleep unharmed. That's not everything, but it's something. And sometimes, something is enough to matter." If this story moved you the way we hoped, if you felt the weight of Maya's careful attention and the price of predation hunting unseen, then leave a comment and tell us, when have you noticed something small that turned out to be significant? When have you trusted your instincts even when systems told you otherwise? Subscribe to this channel to follow stories of courage and observation, of ordinary people seeing what others miss and acting on what they see. Like this video and share it with someone who needs to understand that paying attention is its own kind of power, that the careful recording of detail can save lives, and that the most important work we do is often the smallest, the quietest, the most easily overlooked, until it's suddenly the only thing that matters.